I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Welcome back. What a delight to have with us today Bruce Hausknecht. He is the Focus on the Family judicial analysis. And like all of us, we're waiting to see what the Supreme Court is going to decide. And we're not sure when this decision is going to be released. Could be any day now, or it could be as late as next Tuesday. Bruce, nice to see you. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, Perry. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for all what you guys do that Focus on the Family. It's a partnership that we cherish to work with you guys. All right. You know, I'm surprised how many people aren't even aware that this is about ready to come out. Explain the case to those who may be hearing this for the first time.
Well, of course, we know that same-sex marriage has been around since 2003 when Massachusetts, when their top court mandated that state start licensing and performing same-sex marriages. And since then, we've had 31 states pass marriage protection amendments in their own state constitutions to try to salvage and safeguard one man, one woman marriage. But now the federal courts have gotten involved since 2013 when the Supreme Court handed down the Windsor decision, which struck down the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, which defined marriage at the federal level as one man and one woman. So since 2013, we've had these federal courts striking down all these state marriage amendments so that now we have 36 states that have either been ordered by a court to recognize them or did it legislatively. And actually, of those 36 states, more than 2/3 were ordered by federal or state courts to start performing them. So that brings us to the 4 states that are before the Supreme Court right now. Their marriage amendments were challenged: Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, and Tennessee. But their marriage amendments were upheld by a federal appeals court last year. So the gay activists involved in those suits appealed to the Supreme Court. They heard it. They heard arguments in late April. And now we're waiting to see the answer to 2 questions. One, does the Constitution, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, require same-sex marriages across the land? And the second question, does the 14th Amendment require states to recognize out-of-state same-sex marriages performed elsewhere, like in Massachusetts, where it's legal? So those are the 2 questions, and we're waiting, as you said, any day now. Could be Thursday, could be Friday, Monday, or Tuesday. It's just hard to tell with the Supreme Court. They don't really tell you when they're going to issue decisions. But so we count the tea leaves, we count the number of opinions that are left to be issued, and so it looks like it could be this week or early next.
Boy, there's so much here. Back to the states just for a moment. There are a lot of those states who were forced by the courts to go ahead and recognize same-sex marriages, even though the will of the people was not to recognize same-sex marriages. Can those ever be challenged again?
Well, I'm afraid not. If the Supreme Court upholds those federal court decisions, what we're dealing with is a basic issue of civics that we all learned in high school or maybe even elementary school, and that is that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and it trumps even state constitutions that are contrary to the federal Constitution. So if the justices decide that the 14th Amendment requires same-sex marriage, that would trump a state marriage amendment that says marriage can only be between one man and one woman. So it's an issue of the supreme law of the land versus states' rights, and that is how we got to the Supreme Court.
Bruce, I know you and others monitored the arguments as they were being presented there to the justices. How did you feel the arguments went?
Well, you know, you can never tell very much from oral arguments. I've been in those kinds of appellate courtrooms myself, and judges feel the obligation to attack both sides of the argument. So you might think that the judge is asking you a friendly question, but then he can turn around and ask you a very hostile question. And it was the same way during the oral arguments. There weren't very many surprises. I think some people looked at some of the things said and said, hopefully, that well, maybe Justice Kennedy really is more concerned about states' rights than he is about forcing same-sex marriage upon all 50 states. So there was some of that discussion afterwards, but you know, you really should not get too emotionally involved one way or the other with what the Supreme Court says during oral argument.
All right, let's take a look at this. There's a couple things now being looked at. One is that two of the justices are being challenged as to whether or not they should be taken off the case and their opinions not considered because they have performed same-sex marriages. Ginsburg and what's the other one?
Well, it's either Kagan or Sotomayor. Probably.
Yeah, Kagan, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Do you think that's challengeable? Can that be looked at?
No. Here's the thing. The ethics rules that apply to Supreme Court justices are really self-applied. There is no higher tribunal that can judge them on whether they must recuse themselves or not. They don't have a judicial board of ethics that can discipline them. Really, the only check and balance in the Constitution that's left if judges are guilty of misconduct is impeachment. And that's a drastic remedy that I don't think we're going to see in this case, even though many of us have been complaining about Justice Ginsburg's, both her participation in these same-sex marriages and the statements she's made on the record to media lately about how America is going to be very willing to accept same-sex marriages. So while it's problematic, it's again something that I don't think we're going to see any kind of resolution of one way or the other.
All right, let's jump forward. Let's say the Supreme Court decides to recognize same-sex marriages. What's that going to do to the faith community?
Well, let's start with churches and pastors, because that's where most people will see it. You're going to see what we're already seeing now in many states that have protections for lesbians and gays. You're seeing people charged with discrimination. There are plenty of cases, whether it's the Kleins, the bakers from Gresham, Oregon, or Barronelle Stutzman, the florist in Washington State, or there's a baker here in Denver, Colorado, that was found guilty. You've got wedding photographers in New Mexico. You have wedding venues all over in places like New York and Iowa and Vermont have all been brought before human rights commissions and charged with discrimination. Now, if same-sex marriage becomes the law of the land, those laws are going to get even more widespread, and we're going to see double, triple the amount of cases brought against Christian people like that. Now, churches fit into this mix because they can become what is called a public accommodation if they hold out their facilities to the public to perform weddings or to host groups like Alcoholics Anonymous in the fellowship hall on Monday nights or something like that. If they hold their facilities out to the community, guess what? LGBT groups are going to demand the same type of access, and if they are not provided that same access, these churches and their pastors could be hauled into before these civil rights commissions under the same types of charges. That's the first area of concern. Parents should know that in some of these states where we already have same-sex marriage, their parental rights to guide their children's education have been severely usurped and damaged by the state. As far back as 2004 in Massachusetts, after they started same-sex marriage, there were parents there who were forced to watch as their children from kindergarten, first grade, second grade on were taught about homosexual marriage. And they took it as far as the federal appeals court and lost, and were told in no uncertain terms that since same-sex marriage was the law in Massachusetts, that the school districts could teach anything they wanted to about that, and the parents had no opt-out rights or had no rights at all vis-a-vis the public schools. And their only solution, their only choice left to them was to homeschool or private school. So parental rights, you have churches that are going to look at public facilities questions. Those are the two main that are going to hit the average Christian in the pews on a day-to-day basis.
All right, a couple of things come out of that. What about Christian schools, and what about us broadcasters? I mean, hello, it's coming at us like a freight train.
Well, yes. Let's talk about Christian schools. Private Christian schools, whether they're elementary or high school or even private colleges, all seek and need accreditation. And if they seek accreditation from some of these secular agencies, some of those secular agencies are imposing their own requirements of non-discrimination. Perfect example is a Christian college in Massachusetts. Gordon College was questioned by its accrediting agency earlier last year about their stance on marriage. Gordon College got in the news because they'd signed the president had signed a letter asking the president not to discriminate against Christian organizations seeking contracts and grants with the federal government. Very innocuous, typical religious freedom thing, yet it raised such a groundswell of opposition to this Christian college that their accrediting agency got involved and said, let's look at your overall policy towards gays and lesbians. And they were able to keep their accreditation, but this is going to be an issue. And the other issue is whether those schools are going to keep their tax-exempt status, because in the new reality of same-sex marriage, are schools that adhere to the biblical definition of marriage going to be deemed not worthy of a tax-exempt status? So, the schools are in jeopardy. Now, in broadcasters, religious freedom has already taken a hit in many areas with same-sex marriage. Canada and the United Kingdom come to mind immediately. They have strict regulations about what you can say and cannot say on the air or in print or on the internet. And they've been prosecuted. Ministries, organizations, people have been prosecuted in those countries for hate speech merely for quoting Bible verses. You're going to see more and more of that type of thing in the United States if same-sex marriage becomes the law in all 50 states.
It's interesting because of the net neutrality bill on the internet, that's already moved the internet over into the utility category, which basically means coming next will be content control, where all of this argument fits in. Bruce, let's talk about the flip side of this. Well, let's say the Supreme Court upholds traditional marriage. I can't imagine the church or the Christian community or the faith community is off the hook.
No. And for the reason I stated earlier, see, Christians are already coming under attack in states with these public accommodations ordinances and other laws that give special status protection to sexual orientation. Those are going to continue. The Kleins in Oregon and the Barronelle Stutzman in Washington, those people are still going to face persecution. Those are going to come up in other states. But if the court was to find that there is no constitutional right to same-sex marriage, that would give at least Christians a fighting chance to at least keep their free speech rights and their religious freedom rights intact long enough to make an impact in the culture and try to turn this ship around.
If they go the other way and they do approve same-sex marriages, does that open Pandora's box for polygamy and every other aberration?
No, absolutely. Because if the man-woman requirement for marriage is meaningless and it's all about who you love, which has been the argument all along, even up to and including the Supreme Court, if that's the definition, then the heterosexual component of marriage really can't stand logically. So it's going to be group marriage, polygamy, and types of marriages we haven't even dreamed of yet, unfortunately, because marriage has always been about uniting the two halves of humanity, male and female, not gay and straight. And it's for the benefit of children created by the two sexes. Once we open it up to everybody else, then marriage ceases to have any real meaning. And Christians are going to have to work extra hard in the culture to restore a culture of marriage.
Okay, it appears that we just don't know which way the court's going to go. I've heard some of the arguments, and some think it's going to uphold, some think it's going to collapse. What is your advice to the faith community? I've always said that we go through 3 stages. We go through shock and awe, then we go through anger and blame. Unfortunately, too many of us stay there. And then the next stage is we take on personal responsibility. What's your advice to the faith community if in fact the federal government's going to recognize same-sex marriages?
Yeah, skip the first reaction. Stay calm and realize that this is not a surprise to God. It's in His eternal plan. He knows how it all works out. We're just instruments in His hand. And we need to be winsome and not feed the fires of our opponents who claim that we're hateful bigots. I think we need to see reactions like we saw among the faith community in Charleston, South Carolina recently, to the tragic murders down there, where white and black churches got together and really united over the issue of race. I mean, we need to see that from the Christian community over the issue of marriage. We need to be teaching our children what the value of marriage really is and what it's about, so that we can reclaim that culture, sort of like we're doing in the pro-life movement right now with the millennials and the younger generation, who are beginning to understand the value of life. I think we can do that with marriage, but we need to act as our Creator would like us to, which is to be winsome, know the facts, be able to talk and defend your beliefs in a way that is not antagonistic and is indeed a winsome reflection of the witness that Jesus Christ would have us be.
Beautifully said, Bruce. You know, the irony of all of this is when you pull back the onion skin, so to speak, of this argument, I've heard it as low as 1%, as high as 2.5%. Of our population is changing the definition of marriage. Is that true?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the unfortunate thing is they are so dominant in the news. Anything having to do with sexual orientation is such a dominant news item that I saw a poll recently that said the average American thinks that gays make up about 23% of the American population, when the Center for Disease Control, which has a more detailed survey, found that 1.6% of Americans actually identify as gay or lesbians. And then a smaller percentage also identifies as bisexual. So it's a very small percentage of Americans. And yes, they are indeed changing the face of American law and the institution of marriage.
Do you see a collaboration within the faith community to defend the traditional marriage, no matter which way the Supreme Court goes? I mean, this would be something that would cross denominational lines, would bring other faith organizations together. Do you see some kind of a collaboration?
Yes, I think that's inevitable, and it's a good thing. We can definitely unite around marriage, no matter what our theological differences are on things like infant baptism or things like that. But yes, we should have Christians uniting with Muslims, Jews, and Seventh-day Adventists and Mormons. It doesn't matter. Those faith communities can all unite around marriage and become a force to be reckoned with, essentially, in our culture, if only we will count our strengths and add them up, so that we're all fighting together instead of being a million separate little voices in the wilderness.
Well, here we go. I guess we'll wait and see what happens. We are, I don't know, we're all standing by. What was surprised to me, Bruce, is how many Christians were unaware that it had reached Supreme Court level. And your phone's probably ringing off the hook now. Ours is too. People just didn't realize it snuck up to that level.
Right. And a lot of people are too busy to pay attention to politics, and they don't even watch the evening news until it actually impacts them. Well, this is actually going to impact everyone in the pews, from parental rights to tax exemptions for churches. Once people understand how serious this is going to be, they're going to get involved. The question is whether it'll be and whether there'll be anything left to sort of rally around, or whether the battle will be lost. Hopefully, we will get in line and get united behind God's definition of marriage and turn this culture around.
I got less than a minute. Do you think ultimately we could go back to the compromise being the civil union, where at least you keep marriage definition of marriage intact, but you created another category?
That's a possibility. You know, there's always a way to provide for people's needs, whether they're heterosexual or homosexual, with regard to legal issues like inheritance and adoptions and things like that. There are ways to provide for that without changing the definition of marriage. And I think people need to recognize that. All
right. Bruce, thank you. And thank you again to your entire team there at Focus. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, you can go to FOTF.org. That's focusonthefamily.org. And Bruce and his team and everybody there do a great job. Thank you, Bruce. Keep up the good work, friend. And let's talk on the other side of this, okay?
All right. Thanks, Perry.
All right. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.